Sometimes, doing the right thing costs more than you expect. Some deeds end with "God will bless you" response. But others, let's just say they might be opening the door that you never expected it would be opened. Such an incident happened to Brian, a single father who stopped to help a man he didn't even recognize, and ended up losing everything he had. But what he didn't know was that the man he helped was Jason Statham, and one post from him would change Brian's life forever. Before we continue, to our returning viewers, thank you truly. Your support keeps this channel alive and allows us to share stories that move hearts and remind us what kindness can do. And if you're new here, welcome. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that might just change how you see the world. Brian's day had already gone wrong long before he met Jason Statham. It started with the sound of his old alarm clock refusing to ring. Then his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, couldn't find her shoes. And by the time they finally got out the door, his car wouldn't start. So they walked. Brian worked 2 bus rides away, a delivery job at a small warehouse on the edge of town. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Barely. He held Lily's hand as they waited for the bus, trying to smile even though his shirt clung to his back with sweat. "We're okay," he told her. "It's just one of those days." She smiled up at him, missing a front tooth. "You always say that, Daddy." He chuckled softly. "Yeah, guess I do." The bus hissed to a stop, and as they got on, Brian couldn't shake the heaviness pressing at his chest. Rent was due in 2 days. His manager had been cutting his hours again, and the bills on the kitchen counter seemed to multiply overnight. He tried not to think about it. But fate, it seemed, wasn't done testing him that day. It happened late that afternoon. Brian had just finished unloading a truck behind the warehouse when he heard the crash. Metal on metal, sharp, sudden, followed by a dull thud. He dropped the clipboard and ran toward the sound. Out on the main road, 2 cars sat twisted at an angle, one, a black SUV that looked expensive, the other, a delivery van like his. The van's front bumper was crumpled, smoke spilling from the hood. People stood around, frozen, phones in their hands. Nobody was moving. Brian didn't think, he just ran. He yanked open the van's driver door. "Hey, you okay?" The man inside was dazed, forehead bleeding slightly. I think my arm's stuck," he muttered. Brian looked down. The man's arm was pinned under the steering wheel, the metal bent inward. He shouted back toward the crowd, "Someone call an ambulance." Then he turned to the other car. The SUV's driver was already getting out, dazed but steady. Brian froze for half a second. He knew that face. Everyone did. Jason Statham. The Jason Statham. But in that moment, it didn't matter who he was. "Hey," Jason said quickly, voice calm but urgent. "Is he okay?" "Arms trapped," Brian said, tugging at the bent metal. "We need to move this off him before that fuel leak gets worse." Jason followed his gaze. Gasoline was pooling near the van's tire, spreading fast. Without another word, the 2 men braced themselves on the crumpled door. Metal screamed as they pulled. The wheel gave way, and Brian dragged the driver out just as Jason stepped back, pulling the door free. Seconds later, a spark from the broken engine caught, and the van went up in flames. The blast threw heat across the road, knocking Brian off his feet. When he looked up, Jason was already pulling him back, shouting, "You good?" Brian coughed, waving off the smoke. Yeah, I'm fine." The driver was shaken but breathing. Sirens wailed in the distance. And for a brief moment, the chaos slowed. Jason looked at Brian, dust and smoke on both of them, and nodded. "You didn't even hesitate." Brian shrugged, catching his breath, didn't really think about it. Jason gave a faint smirk. "Most people don't run toward burning cars." "Most people never had a reason to," Brian said quietly. Jason studied him for a moment, something in his eyes softening. But before he could speak, paramedics arrived, pulling them both aside. By the time everything calmed down, Brian realized he was late, very late. He raced back to the warehouse, sweat still clinging to his neck, uniform half burned at the sleeve. His manager, a heavy-set man with a permanent scowl, was waiting near the door. "Brian," he barked, glancing at the clock. "You were supposed to be here 30 minutes ago." "I know," Brian said quickly. "There was an accident." "Not my problem," the man interrupted. "You've already missed 3 deadlines this month. I can't keep doing this." "I was helping someone," Brian insisted. "There was a crash, people were hurt." The manager raised a hand. "Save it, you're done." Brian froze. "What?" "You're fired," the man said flatly. "Turn in your badge." Brian stared at him, his pulse pounding. "You can't be serious." "I'm running a business, not a charity. You want to play hero, do it on your own time." The words hit like a punch to the gut. For a long moment, Brian just stood there, the weight of it all settling in. His job, his rent, Lily. He wanted to argue, to scream, but he didn't. He just took off his badge, set it on the counter, and walked out. That night he sat on the couch in their small apartment, staring at the wall. Lily was asleep in the next room, clutching her stuffed rabbit. He'd kept the lights low, the apartment quiet, anything to keep from hearing the silence that followed disappointment. Then his phone buzzed. He almost ignored it, thinking it was another unpaid bill reminder. But then he saw the notification. Jason Statham at Realspe. He blinked. That couldn't be real. The tweet read, "Today, a man named Brian pulled a stranger from a burning van while others filmed. He didn't know who I was and he didn't care. That's the kind of person this world needs. If anyone knows where to find him, I'd like to." The post had millions of likes. Brian's hands trembled as he read it again. His phone started blowing up with messages from people he hadn't heard from in years. "Is this about you? Bro, you're on Twitter. Jason Statham just posted about you." Brian sat back, staring at the screen. The picture attached to the tweet, someone from the crowd must have taken it, showed him dragging the driver away from the flames, Jason a few steps behind him. It didn't even look real. For a long time, he didn't know whether to feel proud or terrified. Because tomorrow, he'd still be jobless, still be a single dad trying to make rent. He turned off the phone and stared at the ceiling. "What good's a tweet gonna do?" he muttered to himself. He didn't know how wrong he was. By morning, his inbox was full. News outlets wanted interviews. Companies offered small donations. Someone even started a GoFundMe without him knowing. He ignored most of it. But one message stood out from an official email address, Jason Statham's team. He read it 3 times before believing it. "Jason would like to personally meet with you to thank you for what you did yesterday. Please respond at your earliest convenience." Brian didn't even know what to say. By noon, a black SUV pulled up outside his apartment. Lily stood at the window, eyes wide. "Daddy, is that him?" Brian smiled nervously. "I think it might be." The knock came steady, polite. When he opened the door, Jason Statham stood there. No cameras, no entourage, just him, wearing a dark jacket, the same calm expression as yesterday. "Brian," he said with a nod, "mind if I come in?" Brian stepped aside, still half in disbelief. Jason looked around the small living room, the worn furniture, the kids' drawings taped to the fridge. "Nice place," Jason said softly. Brian chuckled. "It's home." Jason sat, motioning to the couch. "You saved a man's life yesterday. That doesn't go unnoticed." Brian shook his head. "I didn't do it for attention, just did what anyone would." Jason smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how few people still think like that." For a moment, silence filled the room, comfortable, understanding. Then Jason leaned forward. "You lost your job over it, didn't you?" Brian looked up sharply. "How'd you?" Jason held up his phone. "Someone online mentioned it, that your boss fired you for being late after the crash." Brian exhaled slowly. "Yeah, guess being a decent human doesn't pay the bills." Jason's expression darkened slightly. "Maybe it should." He stood, pulling out his phone. "You got a minute?" "Sure," Brian said, confused. Jason typed something quickly, then handed Brian his screen. "Read it." The tweet draft said, "Half of my assets will be given to Brian, the man who reminded me what real strength looks like." Brian's eyes widened. "Wait, what? You can't, Jason, that's..." Jason smiled. "Relax, I'm not giving away everything, but I am helping you get back on your feet. People need to see what happens when good gets rewarded, not punished." Brian shook his head, speechless. "I don't know what to say." Jason clapped him on the shoulder. Say you'll take it for your daughter. At that, Brian's throat tightened. He looked at the little girl watching them from the hallway, her big brown eyes filled with curiosity. He finally nodded, all right. Jason hit post. And just like that, the world exploded. Within an hour, news channels everywhere were covering it. Jason Statham helped single dad who lost job after saving stranger. Donations poured in. Companies called with job offers. Even Brian's old boss tried to reach out, too late. But what really mattered most came later that night. When Lily climbed into his lap and whispered, "Daddy, are we gonna be okay now?" He smiled, hugging her close. "Yeah, sweetheart, we're gonna be okay." For the first time in years, Brian woke up without panic. No alarm blaring, no dread of bills waiting on the counter, no tightness in his chest that came with wondering how he'd make it through another day. Instead, sunlight slipped through the blinds, and the sound of Lily humming filled the small apartment. She was sitting at the kitchen table, crayons scattered everywhere, drawing what looked like two stick figures standing beside a car. Above them she'd written, "Daddy and Jason saving people." Brian smiled. "You're getting good at that, kiddo." She grinned, swinging her legs. "That's us being heroes." He laughed softly, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. "Heroes, huh? I just helped a guy. The real heroes wear badges and helmets." Lily looked up, serious. "You always say that, Daddy, but you helped. That's what heroes do." He couldn't argue with that. By mid-morning, the street outside was quieter than usual, until a knock came at the door again. When Brian opened it, there were reporters, dozens, cameras flashing, microphones shoved forward. "Brian, how does it feel to have Jason Statham call you a hero? Is it true he's giving you half his assets? Do you plan to work with him?" Brian blinked, frozen. No comment, please, I." Before he could finish, another black SUV rolled to a stop. And once again, Jason Statham stepped out. The crowd went silent for half a second, then erupted in shouts and camera flashes. Jason ignored them. He walked straight to Brian, calm as ever, and said in that low, gravelly voice, "Let's get you out of this mess." He nodded toward the SUV. "Come on, we'll talk somewhere quiet." They drove for half an hour away from the city, away from the noise, to a quiet coffee shop by the coast. No cameras, no one bothering them. Jason ordered 2 black coffees, handed one to Brian, and said simply, "You okay?" Brian chuckled weakly. "I don't think I've ever been less okay and more okay at the same time." Jason smiled. "That's fame for you, it's loud." Brian shook his head. "I don't want fame, I just wanted to do the right thing." Jason leaned back. "And that's why it matters. You didn't do it for a camera, you didn't hesitate, you didn't even know who I was." Brian shrugged. "Didn't need to." Jason looked out at the ocean for a long moment, then said, "You know, a lot of people talk about doing the right thing, but when it's time to act they freeze. You didn't. That's rare." Brian smiled faintly. "I just didn't want that man to die." Jason turned back to him. "You've got a good heart, Brian, and I don't think you should have to struggle for it." Brian frowned slightly. "I'm grateful for what you did, but Jason, I can't take all that money. It doesn't feel right." Jason smirked. "You think I haven't heard that before? It's not charity, it's appreciation." "Still," Brian said quietly, "I don't want my daughter growing up thinking people owe her for kindness. I want her to believe that helping others is worth it even when it costs you." Jason studied him for a moment, then smiled, slow and genuine. "You know what? I like you even more now." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "All right, no money, not yet anyway, but I do have something else." Brian hesitated before opening it. Inside was a card with embossed letters, "Statham Productions, London." "What's this?" Jason took a sip of his coffee. "A job." Brian blinked. "A job?" "Yeah, my team's been looking for someone to coordinate logistics on set. You've got experience handling deliveries, schedules, problem-solving under pressure. You'd fit right in. Full benefits, good pay, and you'd still get to go home to your kid every night." Brian stared at him, speechless. "You're serious?" Jason smirked. "You think I joke about work?" Brian exhaled, shaking his head. I don't even know what to say." Jason shrugged. "Say yes. Then get some new shirts, the internet's seen enough of the one you're wearing. Brian laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. All right, he said, I'm in. Over the next few weeks, Brian's life began to change. Not in the sudden, glittering way movies make it seem, but slowly, quietly. The cameras went away. The noise died down. What remained was peace and purpose. He started working with Jason's team, coordinating deliveries, managing transport for film sets, sometimes even traveling to locations. It was honest work, and for once it paid enough to let him breathe. Every day when he came home, Lily would run to the door shouting, "Daddy's home." And every time he'd scoop her up, kiss her forehead and whisper, "Always." But one afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, just his name in neat handwriting. Inside was a note. "Not everyone saw what you did that day, Brian, but I did. You gave me another chance at life, thank you." The man from the van. And below it a photo, the same man, now standing with his arm in a sling, smiling beside his family. Brian sat down, staring at the note, feeling something heavy and warm settle in his chest. Lily walked over. "What's that, Daddy?" He smiled softly. "A thank you note." She climbed onto his lap, peering at the picture. "That's the man you saved." "Yeah," Brian said, his voice low. "He's okay now." Lily nodded. "Then you really are a hero." Brian laughed quietly. "No, sweetheart, I just didn't look away." A few days later, Jason called him in for a meeting. When Brian arrived at the studio office, Jason was waiting in his usual black jacket, looking like he'd just walked off a movie set. "Got a minute?" Jason asked, motioning to the chair across from him. "Sure," Brian said, sitting down. Jason leaned forward. "I saw the post from that guy you saved." Brian nodded. "Yeah, that one got me." Jason smiled. "You see what happens when one person decides to care." Brian thought for a moment. "You mean the ripple effect?" "Exactly," Jason said. "Because of what you did, because you acted, I've had over 50 people reach out saying they stepped in to help someone after seeing your story. A woman stopped a mugging. A kid helped an old man who fell. Even a firefighter wrote saying it reminded him why he joined in the first place." Brian looked down, overwhelmed. "I didn't think it'd go that far." Jason chuckled. "Neither did I, but sometimes the smallest thing can start something big." He paused. "You changed more lives than you know, Brian, including mine." Brian met his eyes. "You would have done the same." Jason smiled faintly. "Maybe, but you did it first." Months later, life had settled into a new kind of normal. Brian and Lily moved into a better apartment. Not fancy, but warm, bright, and close to the park she loved. On weekends, Jason would stop by sometimes, no cameras, no fanfare. Just a quiet visit, bringing Lily her favorite chocolate milk or taking Brian out for coffee. One evening, the three of them sat on the back porch watching the sunset. Lily was coloring again, humming softly. Jason leaned back in his chair. "You know, I still get messages about that tweet." Brian laughed still. Jason nodded. "Apparently people think I gave you half my fortune." Brian smirked. "You did." Jason raised an eyebrow. "You'll find out in my will." They both laughed. Then after a pause, Jason said, "You ever think about that day, the crash?" Brian looked out at the horizon. "Every now and then. Mostly, I think about how close I came to not stopping." Jason nodded. "But you did." "Yeah," Brian said quietly. "Guess I just couldn't live with watching something bad happen when I could do something about it." Jason smiled. "That's the part that sticks, mate. You didn't have to know someone to care. That's what makes it real." When Jason left that night, he paused by the car and said, "You know, Brian, the world doesn't need more famous people. It needs more decent ones." Brian smiled. "Guess we're both trying to do our part then." Jason chuckled. "Fair enough." They shook hands, firm, grounded, and Jason drove off into the evening light. Brian stood there for a long while, watching the car disappear, feeling something he hadn't in years: peace. He walked back inside, kissed Lily goodnight, and sat down beside her drawing. This one showed three stick figures now, her dad, and Jason, standing under the words "Good people help." He smiled, folded it carefully, and pinned it to the wall. Sometimes one act of kindness changes a life. Sometimes it changes the world. And sometimes it reminds us that no matter how dark the day starts, there's always someone willing to run toward the light.